and it's a real pleasure to be with you today to talk about water accounting for Sustainable Development Goals, from promise to practice, how accounting for multiple values can be used for sustainable development. It's traditional here in Australia for us to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where I am, which is Ngunnawal land here in ACT. We're meeting on today, and pay my respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge members of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community who may be attending this meeting today, and wherever they may be, where we're meeting around the world today. I'm General Manager of Population, Labour, Location and Business Indicators here in the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and also Interim Chair of the UN Committee of Experts on Environmental Economic Accounting. And it's a real pleasure to bring you together today to talk about water accounting and this really important area of water, a key component of natural capital, and how they can contribute not only to the achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, but also for shaping national policies and priorities. We've put together a really exciting program for you today in 3 parts. We're going to be it's a real pleasure to have 2 ministers with us today. The Honourable Tanya Plibersek, MP Minister for Environment and Water from the Government of Australia, as well as the Honourable Carl Herman Schutwein, the Minister for Agriculture, Water and Land Reform from the Government of Namibia. So we're going to hear from our 2 ministers in a moment. We're then going to be hearing from a senior statistician, Brian Edens, from the United Nations Statistics Division, who's just going to give us an introduction to water accounting before we turn over to a panel discussion where we've put together a really fantastic panel of experts in water accounting, in their production, in their use, and in demonstrating their value for policies, priorities, and achieving the 2030 Agenda. And we also have allowed time today for questions and answers. So please do send your questions in. We've already received a few, but we're really very happy to hear from you and make this as much interactive dialogue as we possibly can. So without further ado, I would like to now warmly welcome you again to this side event, and like to hand over to our first 2 speakers, our ministerial ministers from the Government of Australia and the ministers from the Government of Namibia. The Minister from Australia, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, couldn't be with us in person today, but she's kindly prepared a recorded message, and I'd now like to ask the Secretariat if they could please play that. Thank you very much. Over to you, Elsa.
Hello everybody joining us today in New York and around the world. I'm Tanya Plibersek, Australia's Minister for the Environment and Water, coming to you from Canberra, Australia's capital. In Australia, we open our meeting by acknowledging our First Nations peoples and their continuing culture and connection to land and water. So I do that here today and pay my respect to Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who might be listening in, and to First Nations peoples from around the world. In this session, I wanted to talk to you about some lessons Australia has learnt about managing our precious water resources. Water is one of our biggest challenges in Australia. We live on the driest inhabited continent on Earth. We've got highly variable rivers with frequent long-lasting droughts broken by large and often dangerous floods. And we know that climate change is making our problems even worse, with more extreme weather conditions and growing water scarcity in many parts of our country. So managing our water in this context can be incredibly complex. But our greatest challenge is also a simple one. For over 100 years, we've been taking too much water out of our rivers. We learned that the hard way in a devastating drought that hit us in the early 2000s, which we called the Millennium Drought. Our biggest river system is called the Murray-Darling Basin. It's where 2 mighty rivers meet and then wind their way out to sea. It's the food bowl of Australia. It's home to 2.3 million people and 40 of our First Nations. It produces $22 billion in agricultural production each year. It literally feeds our nation and much of the world too. And during the Millennium Drought, inflows to the basin fell to the lowest level on record. In fact, the City of Adelaide's drinking water was put in serious danger. Riverbeds ran dry. Communities across the river system were battered and shell-shocked like never before. It was an awful time for our country, but it motivated our governments to get serious, to start cooperating across borders to bring our water use to a sustainable level. And that led to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, the first of its kind in the world. We're still on a journey to deliver this plan, but we've made real progress towards achieving it over the last decade. And we know that it's starting to deliver results. Under the plan, more than 2,100 gigalitres of water has been recovered for the environment. That's about 15% of the volume of water previously extracted from the basin's rivers each year. That water kept the Murray River flowing all the way to the sea. It helped flush over 3 million tonnes of salt into the ocean, which is essential for maintaining water quality. It's helped buffer some of the harshest impacts of droughts, keeping fish and animal populations alive in the dry years until the rains returned. These are promising signs that we're on the right track. A lot of work went into developing the Basin Plan from policymakers, scientists, academics, environmentalists, and from communities. Science has driven this plan from the bottom up. During the Millennium Drought, we undertook the most comprehensive water assessment ever undertaken in Australia. We identified how much water was needed to meet local environmental needs at a catchment level. And then we identified how much each catchment needed to contribute back to the shared river system to keep it healthy. The difference between what the environment needed and what we were taking was the volume of water the Australian government sought to recover for nature. Investing in the right science was essential to the development of the Basin Plan, and it remains key. Accurate water accounting can track our recovery targets, but it can also assure communities that we're achieving the outcomes that the plan sets out. It can give them the confidence to invest in their farms and in processing the food and fibre produced in the Murray-Darling Basin. Metering, monitoring and remote sensing technologies mean we can measure and report on progress transparently. It means we know how much water flows down the rivers. It means we know how much is taken out. And it means we can make sure that the rules are being followed. That's how we knew that the Darling River started to flow backwards, because big pumpers were sucking water directly from the river. Metering, monitoring and remote sensing don't just help compliance, they help measuring the environmental outcomes that the Basin Plan is there to achieve. The Commonwealth manages the water we've recovered for nature. That water is used to improve environmental outcomes, and we're continually learning from experience here. We work in partnership with our states, with local communities, with farmers and with universities to collect and analyse data. It's a big job to deliver environmental improvements to a basin the size of Egypt. We're 10 years in and we've learnt a lot, but there's much more to do if we're to manage the system sustainably for the future. We have a solid base to build from, and I hope that by sharing Australia's experience, I've given you some food for thought and some ideas you might be able to work with. Thank you and good luck with today's session.
Well, thank you very much to the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, Minister for the Environment and Water from the Government of Australia. So as you could hear from the Minister, the ability to account for water, to monitor, to meter and to measure what's important to Australia, to all Australians, is so important, and also for understanding the environmental outcomes. So it was a real pleasure that we were able to have the Minister join us today. I would, before we move to our next part of this session, I would just like to acknowledge the organisers of this session today. the ANU Fenner School for Environment here in Australia, the Australian National University. And we have with us today Professor Michael Varden from that ANU's Fenner School of Environment and the Society, who will be rapporteur for the session later on. My own institution, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, as well as a very important part of the United Nations Statistics Division, who lead for all countries the development and use and implementation of the system of environmental economic accounting. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our colleague, Bram Edens, Senior Statistician from the United Nations. Bram it's a real pleasure to have Bram with us today. He's so experienced in this area of natural capital accounting, the valuation of ecosystem services. He's led a program called the National Capital Accounting Ecosystem Services Program. He was also formerly head of industry, energy and construction statistics at the Dutch Bureau of Statistics. He really has played a key role in the development of the system of environmental economic accounting. So we are in very good hands with Bram here to give us a bit of introduction. Over to you. Thank you, Bram.
Well, thank you, Gemma, for those kind words. And hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay and also see my slides. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. And to give a short presentation about water accounting. So let me first start by taking a bit of a step back. So what is the need for natural capital accounting more broadly, which also includes the water accounts? I think, as we all are aware, our economy and also our well-being crucially depends on nature for various inputs, not the least water resources that it provides. At the same time, economic activities, of course, also impact nature, for instance, through the depletion of natural resources and degradation of the environment. So both of those aspects, both the dependencies as well as the impacts, are arguably not very well reflected in the system of national accounts in its headline indicator, gross domestic product. Decision makers need key information in order to effectively pursue and track sustainable development. And in a nutshell, you could say that the system of environmental economic accounting, or the SEEA, as we usually call it, has been developed to address these shortcomings. So essentially, the SEEA is what we call a statistical framework, a statistical standard that integrates information on the economy and the environment, showing their interrelationship in a manner that is consistent with the system and complementary to the system of national accounts. So visually, the way you can think about this is that, well, in green, what you see here is the economy that is described by the system of national accounts. Consists of economic units, businesses, households that engage in all sorts of activities, production, consumption, and so on. And basically what the SEEA does in a systematic way is embed the economy in what you see here in green, in the environment, detailing all the flows of natural inputs, for instance, of timber, energy, but of course also of water. And then at the same time also describes sort of the pressures that the economy exerts on the environment in the form of residuals, pollutant, waste, and so on. And in a more modern way of thinking, we started to also describe nature as providing all sorts of ecosystem services, such as carbon sequestration, for instance, or water flow regulation, in addition to those natural inputs. So the system of environmental economic accounting consists of two complementary standards. They're called here, or they're called as the central SEEA central framework, and then the SEEA ecosystem accounting in green here. And in addition, we also have a handbook, so-called the SEEA Water, specifically dedicated to water accounting, that provides more further details. So the SEEA describes a whole suite of different types of accounts. And as part of those accounts, there are also various types of water accounts. And I've listed in this slide sort of the most important ones. that I'd like to describe in a bit more detail. So first of all, in the SEEA central framework, we have what we call so-called asset accounts. So they describe opening and closing stocks of various water resources, such as, let's say, groundwater, surface water, and so on, and how it changes over during the accounting period, for instance, due to abstraction. And this is very close to, I think, what hydrologists would call water balances. So secondly, we have what we call physical water supply and use tables. So they describe water use and consumption, abstraction from the environment by various economic sectors, but also how that water flows through the economy and in the form of wastewater, for instance, and is eventually returned to the environment. Then we have a set of emission accounts that describe for all the economic sectors emissions of pollutants to water, for instance, phosphor and hydrogen, but it could also be chemical substances. And then we have what we call hybrid and economic accounts. So for instance, economic accounts, they describe taxes and subsidies related to water resources. Then in the ecosystem accounts, we have, for instance, the ecosystem extent account. So basically this describes a picture of the extent, sort of the size of the various ecosystem types in a country or in a watershed, and how that size changes over time. And this includes, for instance, also freshwater and marine ecosystem types. And this type of information can be used, for instance, to report to the SDGs 6. Then we have also condition accounts that describe basically the health or integrity of for instance, freshwater and marine ecosystems, which includes, importantly, also, for instance, water quality information. And then we have the so-called ecosystem services account. So this describes, and the SEEA ecosystem accounting has a reference list of about 25 ecosystem services, which include also water-related services such as water flow regulation, flood control, and so on, in a spatially explicit manner allocated to the various ecosystem types that provide those ecosystem services. And then finally, I've indicated here also in italics, it's also possible after monetary valuation to also have accounts in monetary units. For instance, there also exist monetary water supply and use tables and monetary water asset accounts. But in this case, it would be important that to apply a valuation technique that is consistent with the principles of national accounts, which is basically exchange values or market prices, which differs from the welfare values that are sometimes used. Now, I mentioned the word accounts several times, so perhaps you are now interested to sort of know what does it look like. So this is an example. I will not go in all the details, but essentially it's a sort of a structured set of information. This is a so-called use table from the Netherlands from 2020. And what you see here in the columns is the various economic sectors and also households. And then it details how much water is being used, and also detailing the different types of water resources where it's abstracted from. So visually, this can also be presented, for instance, in the case here that they did in the Netherlands in the form of a Sankey diagram. So what you see here is on the right, you have, again, those economic sectors, and it's showing here, for instance, that the energy supply sector is the biggest user of water, and this is dominated by saline surface water. So this is really describing the importance of cooling water. And I should mention here that I think this table does not include the so-called green water, which is predominantly used by agriculture. So water accounts in the Netherlands are used by the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management to report on the EU Water Framework Directive every 3 years. So the second example is from Brazil. This is what we call a so-called hybrid account, because it combines information, in this case on water consumption by the various economic sectors, with economic information about their production. And what you see here is a time series of an indicator called the intensity of water consumption, in this case expressed in liters per reais. And what you see here is that agriculture, forestry, and fishing is the most water intense economic sector. There are actually two different metrics that differ to the extent they take soil water or green water into account or not. And I think these types of information can be used for basically tracking performance of economic sectors over time, but also I think more generally in terms of, for instance, water governance and water allocation schemes. Third, this is an example from South Africa on So coming more from the ecosystem accounting framework on an ecosystem condition account. And I think what you can see clearly here is the spatial nature of this account. So South Africa is a water scarce country where water ecosystems are critical to providing a reliable supply of clean water. And this ecosystem condition account was piloted in 2014. And what they were able to do is, in the spatial sense, describe all the various rivers and structures of rivers in a qualitative sense in terms of their condition. You see here, I think, 4 different qualifications here. And then based on that, also aggregated in a headline indicator that you see here in the graph. And basically what it showed is that the overall ecological condition declined with about 10% between 1999 and 2011. This type of information has been used in South Africa to inform the National Water and Sanitation Master Plan, and the accounts have also identified areas of decline in river health so that solutions can be identified and targeted to better manage catchments. In terms of the implementation, where are we now with SEEA? So according to the annual assessment that we do, we have 92 countries compiling SEEA, at least one SEEA account, and oftentimes many more. And of those, we have 42 countries compiling water accounts. I wanted to mention here also a detailed review that was actually just released leading up to this side event that provides further information about the status of water accounts compilation by countries. It also has, I think, many best practices and examples of the policy use of those accounts, and also lists, I think, some of the challenges. And the link is here also on the slide. So with that, this brings me to conclusions. So first of all, there's an increasing number of countries implementing the SEEA and water accounts. I've tried to illustrate that there are various types of water accounts that are able to support a diverse range of policies. Water accounts are also a useful framework for deriving headline indicators that can also be used to support various monitoring and reporting frameworks, such as the SDGs. Most commonly compiled water accounts are in physical units, although of course monetary valuation is possible as well. And then perhaps finally, two perhaps more sort of messages is, I think what we've learned is that standardization is really important to obtain high quality and comparable statistics across countries. And finally, that water accounting, due to its multidisciplinary nature, catalyzes also collaboration between different stakeholders, such as statistical offices, universities, line ministries, and so on. So that's what I wanted to say. Back to you, Gemma. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bram. And look, I'd just like to thank you once again, Bram. Fantastic overview there of the framework, its utility, its versatility, and 3 very good examples there of how it can be used in different settings and applied in so many different regions of our world. For all of those that are listening, we currently have 135 people joining us at this side event. Thank you so much for joining us. A reminder that at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see, if you open up the bottom or hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A and a chat function there. So if you would like to ask us a question, please do put it in that question and answer, and we will do our best to either answer that in the chat or during our Q&A session. For instance, somebody's just asked us, how does this SEEA support the Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is the feature of today's conference? And from where I'm sitting as a user of SEEA, the framework, but also as our countries all report through on the 2030 agenda, SEEA can be used for providing information on water efficiency, water quality. We just heard from Bram, it can be used for water scarcity. It can be used for freshwater ecosystem extent, and it also can be used for providing indicators on the reliance of water-related ecosystem services. So SEEA actually is very versatile across many elements of SDG 6. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Bram. I'm now going to move us through to the third part of our session, which is a panel session. We have put together a really outstanding panel here today, and I'd really like to thank again Michael Varden and the ANU Fenner School of Environment and Society for bringing us these esteemed panelists. I'm just going to ask each of the panelists if you could turn your video on while I introduce you all. So today we have 5 panelists. First one is Juha Sikamaki. He's the Chief Economist of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Juha is an expert in natural capital and nature-based solutions, including valuation and accounting. He's previously worked at the Resources for Future and was closely involved in the development of ecosystem accounts component of the SEEA framework, including chairing the working group on valuation and being a member of the editorial board. He was a key contributor to the World Bank's Changing Wealth of Nations and has extensive global experience. Anna Monero is part of the Water Justice Hub and a research fellow at the Australian National University's Crawford School of Public Policy. She's working on water economics and governance, and her research is focused on improving the understanding of value and valuation of water resources for resilient decision-making and for greater water justice. She's worked on water distribution within smallholder irrigation schemes in Tanzania, has studied and worked in Spain, France, Italy, and the USA, and here in Australia in both private and public sectors. Poulad Kami is a senior irrigation specialist at the World Bank and an associate professor of water and agriculture at the Delft Institute of Hydrology. He's worked on a range of issues relating to water resources and agricultural water management in Asia and Africa, and his current research interests include water accounting, remote sensing, application in irrigation, and water productivity assessment. Mr. Aran Rouge is a senior responsible investment officer at ACT IAM/Cardano, a Dutch sustainable asset manager. He's previously worked at PBL, the Dutch Environmental Assessment Agency. He played a key part in the development of a policy forum on national capital accounting for better decision-making, and is an author of many publications, including a report on how natural capital accounting can address the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think we will share with you, particularly because the country is interested in how can we use natural capital accounting for the SDG indicators. And our final panelist is Ken Bagstead. He's a research economist at the US Geological Survey, a science-based agency of the US Department of the Interior. He's the agency lead for natural capital accounting, and he's co-led a group that's produced pilot SEEA land, water and ecosystem accounts for the United States. And he collaborates a lot with the UN Stats Division and the Barr Center for Climate Change on something called ARIES for SEEA. It's an artificial intelligence tool to make accounts easier to compile and the data sources and methods more transparent. So we really, as you can see, we have such a great panel session here today. And to kick this off, I'd like to turn first to Juha, our Chief Economist of the IUCN. Juha, could you give us your thoughts on natural capital accounting, SEEA for water accounting, moving the promise to practice? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real privilege to be with you today. Before I go into my comments, I actually want to thank, of course, the organizers of this event, but also congratulate Michael Warden and colleagues for authoring the report, Water Accounts and Water Accounting. I think it's a valuable contribution and a helpful reference for anyone working on this topic or even interested in it. I'll make 3 brief comments. My comments focus on the linkages between water and ecosystems. And my first point is that water accounting is simply needed to recognize the importance of water and ecosystems and to more fully account them in decisions. As Bram already noted, we all know that water supports more or less every aspect of human well-being. And we also know that water is often linked to ecosystems in its quantity, in its quality. And that water actually is, of course, needed also for ecosystems to flourish and provide us with food and other goods and services that we benefit from. So given this very critical role of ecosystems, they should be recognized as valuable assets, as forms of capital that need to be maintained and managed, and sometimes perhaps restored if their condition is degraded. However, today we're still in a situation where neither public nor private decision makers typically compile robust data and metrics on ecosystems as valuable forms of capital. And as such, we of course don't incorporate them comprehensively into economic decisions. So in reality, decisions rely on limited information on their dependency and impacts on nature and water. The outcome of this situation is predictable. We see underinvestment in conservation and sustainable management of nature, and we see overinvestment in activities that result in degradation and loss of nature. Now, this is, of course, a major problem ecologically, societally, and economically, and it is the fundamental problem that water accounting and natural capital accounting more broadly seeks to mitigate. So, as actually recognized by IUCN in its resolution on accounting for biodiversity, adopted in 2020 World Conservation Congress, natural capital accounting is simply critical to ensure conservation and sustainable management of nature. My second point follows on Bram's comment on the integrated approach that is involved in water accounting and ecosystem accounting, and I view that as one of the key strengths of this framework. So this integrated biophysical economic approach is needed and implemented to understand and measure the linkages between ecosystems, water, and economy. And here we oftentimes debate in the context of accounting whether we should focus on biophysical aspects of nature or whether we should include also the monetary economic aspects of nature. And so the strength of the framework is that we use an integrated approach where we focus both on measuring the biophysical side of nature, but also the economic side of nature. So very much the same way as nature, society is integrated, we implement an economic accounting framework that integrates biophysical and economic characteristics of nature. There's no choice between biophysical, economic, rather an integration. And my third and final point in these opening remarks is that accounting is extremely valuable for the development of accounts, but much beyond. And so the benefits go far beyond just developing and publishing accounts. As Bram already noted, accounting mobilizes collaboration. It requires multidisciplinary approaches. It involves partnerships between different stakeholders, between different experts, including statistical offices, line ministries, academia, oftentimes research institutions, businesses, civil society, and more. And moreover, accounting, of course, provides a framework not only for national accounting, but also to compile subnational accounts. And in fact, it provides a useful framework and data to support other measurement needs for the linkages between environment, water, and economic activities. Those activities could be undertaken by private organizations. We're working on developing natural capital accounts for cities. We're developing a natural capital accounting, water accounting related applications for nature-based solutions, and also for ecosystem restoration. So while enabling the development and publication of accounts, accounting supports collaboration and development of data that supports decisions that go much beyond accounting. I'll close my remarks there and turn this back over to you, Gemma. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Juha. That's really great insights from yourself and from the IUCN. So thank you so much for that. I'd now like to ask Anna Monero from the Water Justice Hub and the ANU Crawford School of Public Policy. Anna, can you share your thoughts on bringing the promise to practice? Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. So one of the key features of water accounting framework is its ability to facilitate communication among stakeholders through a standard set of terms. However, as we know, there is often some confusion or even some lack of agreement around what these terms mean, including the cost of water, the price of water, the value, and the values. Although the differences may be really obvious to expert accountants, I just wanted to take the opportunity to take a step back and reflect on the importance of defining these terms to have a common language for better communication. So the price of water often refers to the amount of money that willing actors, such as individuals or organizations, pay to acquire water or water services. Taking the example of drinking water, in many countries, this is supplied by public water utilities who charge the users prices to access that service. In some cases, the price depends on the cost of production, on the cost of transport, of distribution or treatment, but it can also depend on government policies, subsidies, or taxes. So the price of water may be close to the exchange value of water, but it rarely reflects the total value of water. The real value of water is its worth. It is a measure of how important water is for us. It can be seen as a human-centric approach, but it also accounts for the values held by humans for the environment and for others. So quantifying the value of water is not an easy task, but it's an important one. So much so that it was the theme of the United Nations 2021 World Water Day. One of the reasons why it is perhaps difficult to measure the value of water is because water holds many different values for many different people. It's multiple qualities, it's multiple uses, multiple meanings, and multiple relations. All of that is what we refer as water values. For example, the United Nations 2021 World Water Development Report, Valuing Water, referred to multiple values, including environmental values, infrastructure values, drinking, industrial, and cultural values. So when trying to quantify the value of water, it is therefore critical to be clear on which water values we are talking about and whose perspective we are measuring those values from. The efforts to value water should always be respectful of people's rights and interests and be carried out within appropriate ethical frameworks. In summary, I just wanted to say that water accounting requires a comprehensive understanding of the price, the cost, the value, and the values of water. And by recognizing the full value of water and incorporating it into decision-making processes, we can ensure that water accounting helps water sustainability and water justice for all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. You make some really good points there around so many ways we can use value, so many ways we can value water, whether traditional ways like cost, price, but also traditional cultural values, heritage values, and I really just applaud you for teasing that out and for the audience here today. So thanks very much, Anna. I'd now like to move to Poulad Karimi, irrigation specialist from the World Bank. The World Bank's really been very instrumental in supporting the development of SEEA, but also supporting countries use the SEEA framework and implement it at the national level. But today we're going to hear from Poulad, an irrigation specialist, about how he's found SEEA and water accounting in his experience. Over to you, Poulad. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gemma, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. This is great place to be and then talk to all the people who are interested in water accounting and who are also experts of water accounting. So basically, as we have been hearing about water accounting as basically delivered by Honorable Minister Plibersek, how we are using water accounting is actually basically condensed in all those talks, right? Water accounting gives you a very good picture of how much water is available, how the water is being used, and then who are the users of water. So in the World Bank, we are trying to actually make use of this knowledge in informing our projects, right? Our basically lending projects, the project that we are going to deploy underground for water development, be it project like irrigation investments, be it water storage, or be it any other project like the rural water supply or water supply sanitation, all the project that has to do with water. Bringing this kind of look into the project cycle, as in into preparation, understanding what are the limits, how much water do we have, How do we account for the uses? What are the additional uses that may be introduced with this kind of application? And also keeping that during the project implementation, understanding basically how is the using that for monitoring progress, using that to monitoring our goals and targets, and also keeping that for our project completion as a way of evaluation. We would like to know whether we have increased water productivity. We would like to know whether the project has reached its target in water saving or water abstraction reduction. All those can be informed and will be informed with water accounting if we develop these methods further, if we take these steps to make water accounting more operational, rather than basically just looking at it as a data, as we heard from the example from Australia, how this is being used to basically to monitor, to understand from across the scales, from the farmers to the basically districts to the basin and to the country. That operational use will give the water accounting the life of basically that we can use it for direct decision making. In that space, we are actually trying to also introduce institutional capacity, basically try to help countries or the projects that are working with us, basically to do water accounting that is tailored to their needs, and also create this basically methods and open basically data and tools that can be employed by different countries, different teams to be able to continuously do water accounting and benefit from the basically the outputs and outcomes. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Poulard. Again, I really like your example here of how it can be to support operations. So we're trying to understand here, how does this framework and how of its many uses, and we've heard about policy uses, we've heard about international reporting uses around the Sustainable Development Goal framework, but I really like how you've brought in here how we can use it for operations, particularly at a local scale. So thank you so much for that contribution. I'm now going to turn to Arun Rouge, as Senior Responsible Investment Officer in the Dutch, in Acme Cardano, a Dutch asset manager. Arun has been really very fundamental to developing so much conversation and policy dialogue on this. So I'm really quite keen to hear from you today, Arun, around how can we bring this through, particularly to the investment community? Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gemma. Yeah, as you said, I'm working at Cardano Actiama, which is a sustainable asset manager in the Netherlands, basically investing the money from a number of pension fund and insurance companies, which we try to do in a sustainable way. And I think that it's also good that in this panel there's someone from the financial sector is involved. So far as also what you see in the examples, accounting is very much used by governments and for research. And as far as used less by companies or financial institutions, whereas I think it can also be very useful for us, and not only to use it, but also to stimulate its growth. And the main reason for this is that, of course, the water scarcity and pollution, they are increasingly becoming a risk for companies, and therefore also for us as a financial institution, so for our clients. Water stress, it leads to production disruptions, decreased productivity, higher costs, more uncertainty, etc., etc. And you see increasingly that financial institutions consider these risks of water scarcity in their assessments. To decide whether or not we want to invest in a company, we have to consider whether the water situation in a country or in the production areas are causing risks for these companies. And next to seeing water scarcity as a risk, we also see more and more examples where the financial sector can support safe water use. It's also this week, or maybe next week, I don't know, it's I guess this week in New York, a colleague of mine is about to launch a water and sanitation fund, specifically focusing on emerging markets, which shows that also here the financial sector can help to manage water and sanitation problems. But going back to these risks, where I'm basically most of my time working on, you see that there are many initiatives to urge companies to improve their disclosure of their water consumption and their water extraction and their emissions and so. And that we also urge them a lot to do more proper water risk assessment, so that they know the risks that they are having, but also we can benefit from that. And we see that there is a real lack of international standards for doing these kinds of assessments and for disclosing the data about their water use, which makes it very difficult for us to compare all the different assessments and to use the data that we get from companies about their water use. And I think that the water accounts can be of help here. It's on the one hand, the water accounts can give information, can give companies the information about whether their operations may be in watersheds with risk of water scarcity or high pollution levels, or whether in an area where they are producing, there may be more companies extracting large amounts of water. So it can help them and us to identify whether that they are running more risks. And here the accounts, they provide the companies and also us an objective source of information, which is often quite difficult to have objective information. And this information can help us and them to do better risk assessments and include this in our financial assessments. On the other hand, you see that parts of the account, of course, are based on company information, and companies can help to improve the quality of the SEEA there, of the water accounts. If they would disclose better information, then also the SEEA can improve from that. And if you see that there is a number of international boards that are working on improving the disclosure regulations for companies. They've got the International Accounting Standards Board and the International Sustainability Standards Board. And they are working on better disclosure guidelines, but I see insufficient attention for water. So I would really encourage also the statisticians and UN and World Bank to cooperate with these standard setting bodies to come to unified definitions and methods to deal with this. So it's there, I think that there we can benefit from one another. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ayan. I think this is a really untapped area of the use of SEEA and water accounting and accounting more generally. And I really like your link there about disclosures, the international, the use by the International Sustainability Board, and we look forward to seeing progress in this area. I'm sure you're doing your best to improve that visibility. So thank you so much for your insights there this morning. I'm now going to ask our final panelist, Ken Bagstead from the United States Geological Survey, to share his experience with water accounting. So we've heard from international colleagues, from the IUCN, from the World Bank. We've heard from the research sector, the Water Justice Hub. We've heard from investment sector now with AR. But I'd really quite keen to hear from Ken, particularly from a country point of view. Ken, if you are able to share with us, given your extensive support of rolling these out in the US, please, over to you, Ken. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thanks, Gemma. It's my pleasure to be with you all today. While the U.S. is somewhat of a newcomer to the global SEEA community, we have significant potential to advance the state of play around water accounting, and we're excited to do so. I'm going to talk today about how water accounts fit within the larger U.S. system for environmental economic accounting that was laid out in the January 2023 National Strategy, which was led by the White House and the Department of Commerce. Building on that strategy and drawing on the experience of a first pilot water account that we published in 2020, we've worked to coordinate activities across various federal government agencies, which is necessary given our decentralized statistical system. Diverse agencies, including the U.S. Geological Survey, the Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and Bureau of Economic Analysis, have created an internal roadmap toward production-grade water accounts by around the year 2029. As part of a coordinated national strategy, water accounts benefit from related land, environmental activities, and ecosystem accounts. Land accounts are critical to describe how land use and land cover are changing over time, allowing us to understand drivers and impacts on infiltration, runoff, and point and non-point source pollution. Environmental activities accounts will quantify spending on water treatment, pollution control, and other water-related activities. And finally, ecosystem accounts will quantify water-based ecosystem services related to water purification, flood control, and other benefits in a spatially explicit way that lets us understand patterns at local and watershed scales on up to state and national scales. Pilot versions of many of these accounts are already underway or will be in the near future. And the integrated nature of the system gives water accounting its power, the ability to link to a diverse and powerful statistical system in a way that isolated water statistics cannot. Like all nations, the US faces the need to make sure its water accounts are relevant for decision making. Key challenges include the need to build a more widespread understanding of what water accounts offer, to produce timely accounts, and finally to integrate them in various decision-making contexts across multiple levels of government, water and watershed and water management entities, and the private sector. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak today as we look forward to increased US activity in water accounting nationally and internationally.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ken. It's really great to hear for all of our listeners who are with us today. If you are working in a country that does have a decentralized system like the US does, there's real credit to see that the US can put together pilot accounts for land, for water, and for ecosystem accounts, and it is possible. And I really like your point there, Ken, around the integrated nature of the accounting framework itself supports an integrated approach with a country as large as and decentralized as your own system is. So thank you. That's a really great insight. Look, I'd now like to introduce the government of Namibia. Our minister is unable to be with us today, but we have Representative Elijah Narari. Apologies if I haven't pronounced your surname correctly there, Elijah, who's the Deputy Executive Director for the Minister for the Ministry, and is able to speak on behalf of the Minister for Agriculture, Water and Land Reform from the government of Namibia. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble here so early in the morning here in Australia. So thank you so much for joining us. Panelists, before we come back to you with some Q&A, I'm just going to invite the Deputy Executive Director of Namibia to share with us his speech. Thank you very much. Over to you, Elijah. Thank you. We just ask you to turn your mute off, Elijah, down the bottom on the left-hand side of the screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and Ms. Gemma van Halderen.
Yes, thank you.
My Afrikaans was able to help me there. Yeah, and dear colleagues, fellow panelists, I am standing in for our Minister, Honorable Karl Hermann Gustav Slotthein, who had looked forward to be here, but due to other pressing items that require his attendance here in New York, he was unable to attend, and he has therefore delegated me to deliver his statement. It's a very topical issue, and we welcome it, as others have done, especially the theme and the topic, from promise to practice, how accounting for multiple water values can be used for sustainable development. I must say that, yes, we are here in New York, and as I listen to you speaking from Australia, it gives me a vivid recollection of when we were in Australia, especially Perth, New South Wales and Queensland and Northern Territory. So your country, I know you have said it's the driest. You have a twin brother in the name of Namibia that is also equally dry in terms of water. So by way of background, Africa's freshwater resources are estimated to be nearly 9% of the total of the whole world. However, these resources are unevenly distributed, with the 6 most water-rich countries in Central and West Africa holding 54% of the continent's total resources. and the 27 most poor countries holding only 7. According to a report of 2021 UN World Water Development Report, water, unlike most other natural resources, has proven extremely difficult to determine its true value, as there is no one true value of water, but rather multiple values. However, a clear understanding of the multiple values of water is needed to drive political attention and financial investment for sustainable water resources development on the continent. This is vital so as to achieve the aspirations of the Africa Water Vision 2025 and African Union Agenda 2063. That brings us then to the question of how accounting for multiple water values can be used for sustainable development. One, accounting for multiple water values is fundamental for effective and equitable allocations for the various sectors of development. This helps to determine water use efficiency and undeserved sectors. 2, accounting for water use values is also useful to enable stakeholders to influence policymakers to adopt sustainable solutions to improve water security. 3, quantifying water resources and uses of water is also useful tool for understanding and resolving the water problems and supporting water management and reforming water governance for equitable access. Therefore, accounting for multiple water values is critical for sustainable development and attainment of the goals of the Water Action Decades 2008 to 2018 and 2030 Agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. In most of Africa, valuing water has been a challenging task, partly due to limited baseline historical data. Studies valuing water in Africa have mostly focused on domestic water use and on using the actual price paid or the willingness to pay from the consumer's point of view, as the previous panelist has indicated. Now, such narrow view of the values of water can lead to a number of issues, such as inequalities in access to water resources and water-related services. Now, moving from promise to practice in accounting for the multiple value of water, especially in Africa or in many African countries, demands the following, and by no means exhaustive. 1, integrated and holistic approaches to water governance involving accounting for both water source and environmental costs to drive sustainable water resources management. 2, adoption of innovative and blended financing approaches in water service delivery that takes cognizance of water as input for production, socioeconomic activities such as food, agriculture, energy, and industry. 3, water managers and decision makers to move from narrow sectoral interventions to an integrated intersectoral approach with emphasis on ecological and environmental values, as well as climate resilient water management. 4, application of innovative research and technology in water resources development and management to drive inclusive socioeconomic transformation on the continent. 5, creating awareness, knowledge sharing, and capacity building among stakeholders and actors at all levels in order to incorporate a comprehensive mix of values in sustainable water governance. Therefore, from the perspective of the continent, for the achievement of the aspirations of Africa Water Vision 2025, as well as Agenda 2063, there's the need to move from promise to practice by accounting for the full multiple values of water resources in Africa. By doing this, there will be adequate, it is adequate to understand on the need for considerable investment in infrastructure, appropriate technologies, and the use of non-conventional water resources to enhance water security and sustainable management of water resources. Now, saying this, and therefore, in summary, moving from promise to practice in Africa imply concerted efforts at national and regional levels to implement integrated water resources management approaches, including transboundary cooperation on both surface and groundwater resources to ensure sustainable supply of water for life, for agriculture and food production, for energy and other ecosystems and benefits. With this, I thank you very much. And this was the statement that our Honorable Minister was to deliver. And once again, apologies that he could not do so in person. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Elijah, and please pass on our thanks to the Honourable Minister for his statement and for inviting you to share that statement and share the important work and ambitions of Africa, your country itself, as well as the African continent. It's really wonderful to have you here today. So thank you so much. I really liked your comment there around importance of knowledge sharing and discussion. And it's really great that you were able to share your knowledge with us today and contribute to today's discussion. So thank you, my thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Look, we've got about 15 minutes or just over 10 minutes left for this side event. I'd like to thank all the participants once again for all the questions that you're raising in the chat function there on Zoom. We're now going to move to the Q&A session, and I'm going to invite Professor Michael Varden, who's been really instrumental in pulling together this side event for us today. Michael's going to facilitate the Q&A and put his own questions as well as questions that have appeared in the chat function to the panelists that are here with us today. Michael is, as I said, Associate Professor of Environmental Accounting at the Australian National University's Fenner School of Environment and Society. He was formerly a Director of the Centre of Environment Statistics at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and he's played a leading role in the development of SEEA Water as a member of its editorial board. He was also a member of Policy and Technical Expert Committee on Wealth Accounting and the Valuation of Ecosystem Services Partnership with the World Bank. And he's been working around the world on developing and implementing accounting. He led that review that Bram shared with you in his presentations. So Michael, can I ask you to facilitate the Q&A with our panelists, please? Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Gemma, and thank you for that introduction. Look, I'll firstly put the first question. I think I'll put it to Bram, and it's a question on what assistance is in place to help countries with the implementation of the SEEA.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, so we have various, I think, resources available. So including e-learnings on our platform, and I'll put in a link later on that I think may be of use for countries. In addition, we're also working, and I think Ken perhaps may also add a little bit more on that. Making applications available also, such as the ARIES for SEEA, that sort of, for instance, pull in all sorts of global data sources on water-related information that would make it also, I think, easier for countries sort of to stand up a basic set of accounts. Thanks.
No. So thank you very much for that, Bram. And that is a nice segue, because there has been questions on data and what to do. So I'll go to Poulard first, and then Ken can follow up after that. But Poulard?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we have the question about how do we do water accounting where data and information are scarce or not available. So basically that is a major obstacle, we know that. But there are methods nowadays to use remote sensing to complement all the data that we have from the ground to see what we can do with that, right? Basically, it wouldn't be 100% maybe accurate, but it would be quite a bit of way that we can go, and then a lot of information that we can capture, and then try to build towards the basically better cases where we have data. And also highlights the basically importance of the investments in data collection and water data collection. So that's also a big major step. Once we show the value of water accounting, getting the policy support and then basically strategy support to collect data for water accounting would be an easier step. So I would say we should implement more and then use what's available to build cases for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Poulard. And Ken, did you want to add some more on ARIES and some of the other information?
Yeah, building on the need that Poulard just mentioned for new data sources that are publicly available, we also need to make sure that those data are publicly accessible and interoperable. And that means that they're able to speak with and work with each other in a coordinated way. And when we have that, we can use artificial intelligence approaches like that we've developed in the ARIES platform to be able to integrate the data more quickly, more transparently, and in a more user-friendly way. And as well to be able to integrate national and local scale data with global data sources so that it's not just about an account produced with global data, but it's about being able to produce even higher quality accounts using local data. So we're excited to continue to do that work in partnership with the UN and others.
Look, thank you very much for that, Ken. It certainly is an exciting space with the data becoming available. Look, we've got a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get through them all. Gemma, I'm going to trust you to sort of cut me off at the appropriate moment. But we've had one on the accounting for values and how do we account for the alternative values, which are there any examples or what's the best practice? So, but Anna, would you like to address this one?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, that's a very broad topic. So there are best practice, and the field of ecological economics has developed and has done a tremendous amount of work in the last 20, but more in the last like 10 or 5 years. So there are best practice there. And actually at the heart, we developed a review, a comprehensive literature review of values evaluation within the context of Indigenous peoples, which of course is one of the most critical elements to value, because the value systems that Indigenous peoples hold is typically very, very different to a market-based system. So there are best practice there, and anyone who's interested, please send me an email. I can point you to the literature. I think one of the key elements in doing values, operating by the frameworks and valuation properly, is to understand what are we doing the valuation for. Are we doing the valuation to understand the value for whom? Are we doing the valuation to inform a compensation case, and that information can be used in litigation? Are we using the valuation to inform trade-offs? What is the best option? So I think that's one of the in terms of best practice, understanding why we're doing valuation is really important. Also, whose values are being accounted for. Understanding that the values can be subjective, and different perspectives may result in different amounts of that value. And as I said in the presentation, really making sure that when we do the valuation is done within appropriate ethical frameworks, not only the ethical frameworks of our institutions, but also the ethical frameworks of the peoples who we're consulting with.
Look, thank you very much for that, Anna. Certainly a lot of work going on with that, and Anna has worked across the world in many places. We've had a few different questions, and they some were submitted before and some here, but it's water quality and water pollution, and there's been some fish killed off in Australia. But I think it's, how does the accounting deal with water pollution and water quality? And perhaps I can put that one to Bram.
Yeah, so I think the accounts are really sort of a comprehensive suite of different accounts. So I think an issue like pollution, I think you could picture both, I think, from, let's say, the what we call the emission account, sort of, you know, detailing sort of the sources of that pollution, but then also the let's say there's also a water quality account, but I think there's what I presented on also this ecosystem condition account that is, you know, capturing basically the state of the ecosystems, the surface water resources, and then of course also, yeah, in terms of a comprehensive set of variables and how that changes over time. So I think it's sort of this multifaceted, I think, comprehensive approach that gives you the full picture. Thanks.
No, thank you very much for that, Bram. And there's another one on the SDGs and how do we get to the SDGs, and perhaps I'll put that one to Ayan, because I know that he has done some work on all of the SDGs, not just SDG 6. So perhaps, you know, how does the SEEA work for the SDGs as a whole, as opposed to just SDG 6 on clean water and sanitation? Have you got a 30-second answer for that?
Yeah, well, I have to admit that it's gone far away since I left the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency. So I guess Bram can better answer it, or maybe some Poulat or so. What I know is that there's such a large amount of data in it that, well, many of the data are directly linked to the SDG indicators that are part of the whole framework. I have to admit, I don't recall at the back of my mind again of any more which ones it are. So maybe Bram has it, can answer it like this.
Yeah, I think, well, the SDGs is, I think, very much an integrated agenda, you know, with all these various goals. And I think the SEEA in that sense is well placed because it's an integrated information system that sort of, yeah, brings together the environmental, the economic, and a little bit also the social. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bram. And there's also a paper from AYAM which we can make available to people on the SDGs. There's one here on the institutional setup for water accounting. There's a nice little piece on the review that we did, but perhaps I'll go to Ken, who's within government, who's trying to set up a complex government process. So what is the best arrangement, or, you know, is there a best arrangement for water accounting or accounting in general for countries?
Well, I think you hit on it in your in the answer you wrote, Michael, that there is no one approach. I will say that in the US, with a decentralized system, we've had to have a lot of coordination. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, which produces our economic statistics, is ultimately going to be producing the statistics at the end, but they'll require the support of a number of other agencies involved in biophysical modeling and monitoring, valuation, et cetera. And it helps in our case to have the support of the White House, so a centralized entity that can help connect it. And there's a role for academics as well to advance the research agenda. So I think all of the above.
Thank you very much. And we've just got one on the climate change increasing. Oh, so Gemma's going to.
Yeah. Sorry, Michael. I think I probably do need to wrap it up. Would you like to do that last question, or will you? Let's just do the climate change one, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Well, it comes back to the climate change and increasing droughts in low-income countries. They're putting more pressure on water resources, and it's how to secure the finance needed and how to justify the value. So perhaps if we can put that one to Juha about how we might be able to use the value of water to help justify the need for finance. And
sure enough. Thanks, Michael. So very briefly there, the scarcity of water will increase its value, and climate change will increase the scarcity of water in many cases. So I think valuation is probably not going to change the financing problem, but it can go a long ways in making the case for water. There's one more point that I wanted to bring up, is that in the context of drought and climate change, but more generally, water-related services are some of the most frequently invoked services when we think about ecosystem benefits to people. But unfortunately, we're quite limited in our ability to understand how they emerge locally, but especially how they would be valued. So we've done reviews of valuation of water-related services and find that they are quite limited in, especially if we want studies that are consistent with the natural capital accounting, and they're especially limited in addressing some of the key services, including water quality and quantity, and in particularly developing countries, perhaps especially Africa. So much more is needed there by way of generating evidence. Thanks.
Thank you, Juha. So back to you, Gemma, and thank you very much, Gemma, for conducting this.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Michael. Well, look, thank you everybody for joining us today. Our time is up. I would like to thank everyone for being with us today. I'd particularly like to thank the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, Minister for Environment and Water and Federal Member for Sydney here in Australia. I'd like to thank the Honourable Karl-Hermann Schwittwein, the Minister for Agriculture, Water, Land and Reform in the Government of Namibia, and for his statement, and to Elijah for sharing that with us. Thank you to the ANU Fenner School of the Environment and Society, to the Australian Bureau of Statistics and to the UN Statistics Division for co-hosting this side event today. To all of our speakers, to Ayan, to Anna, Poulad, Yuha, Ken, Bram, Michael, thank you all for sharing your really great insights with us today. I've heard from terms of from promise to practice, how can we account for the multiple values, multiple water values? I'm hearing it for water scarcity, for operations, for irrigation, for investments, for disclosure, for reporting, for national, for regional, for subnational, so many different uses that we've heard from our panel today. And I really have learned a lot about why we need valuation and why we need to account for multiple values. So, and finally, thank you to our audience. It's been really good to connect with you today. We've had really good questions come through. Hopefully we've answered them as best we can. But as you can hear, if you would like to follow up with any of us, please do reach out to us. We're very happy to share our expertise and our experience with you. Have a really wonderful day wherever you are. Thank you again for joining us at this event. Thank you so much, Michael. Over to you. Bye, everybody. Thank you.